Hey everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Changes to Renewals and Starting 2019 Legally. We are going to discuss what must be renewed in all states by January 1st, items that are often forgotten about, and more. Our speaker today for our last webinar of the year is Dave Gray. If you're a frequent webinar viewer, you may know by now that Dave has owned and operated Glostone Trucking Solutions since 2001. Where we serve the trucking industry nationwide from our Portland, Oregon office with field tax reporting, asset management, driver training, ELDs, DOT safety, and audit compliance, including drug and alcohol program management with our sister company, Clean Fleet. Dave's expertise in the trucking industry includes serving as the president of North American Transportation Services Association, or NATSA. He's an active industry advisory committee board member for both the International Fuel Tax Agreement, or IFTA, and International Registration Plan, IRP, and is active within Oregon Motor Carrier Transportation Advisory Committee here in Oregon. Before we begin, as this is our last webinar in 2018, I wanted to announce that our upcoming 2019 January Trucking Safety and Compliance Conference is starting up again and is going to be held in Portland, Oregon, Friday, January 25th, 2019. Our main theme for this event this year is what carriers need to know to stay ahead of the curve. There is a lot we will be covering, from reviewing regulatory changes like ELDs that have recently happened, how to optimize your fleet based on the changes, and what regulatory changes are coming. We will have around 7 or so presentations from various industry experts and government officials, as well as a vendor fair this year. And as always, this event will be free and available to join us in Portland, Oregon, or to watch live with our live stream from anybody from our nationwide audience, especially those of you that join us nationwide with our webinars. So stay tuned for more speaker information on how to register. This conference, again, is going to be January 25th, 2019, and we should have more information about that in mid-November. So stay tuned for that. We will invite you all. Lastly, a couple of housekeeping items. One of them is I'm going to mute people as they join in today. There we go. The webinar today is scheduled for an hour. Phones will be muted during the webinar, so please be sure to use the chat box. I've already asked a question about any thoughts on future webinar topics that will begin after our January conference. We're going to start it back up again February or March. And so if you have any thoughts for webinar topics that you'd like to hear, we'd love to hear back about what those topics are. Just write it down in the chat box. If you have questions during the presentation, again, write it in the chat box. I, Luke Kibbe, am your moderator today, and we'll be keeping an eye on that. We'll have time for a Q&A session at the end and go over any of those questions. As always, this webinar is being recorded. And after the webinar, we are going to send a link of the recording and the slides of this webinar to everybody who joined us and have registered for this event. And so just keep an email, or just an eye out in your email tomorrow. With that, I'm going to go ahead and dive in. Again, we thank Dave Gray for joining us today, and I'm switching it over to him. Dave, you can take it away.
All right. Thank you, Luke, and welcome everybody. So Luke, I think I selected the right button, and hopefully you're now seeing my screen.
Yep, good to go there, Dave.
All right, very good. So it's hard to believe we're looking at the end of October, and with the end of October, we're already starting to think about Thanksgiving and the holidays. The year has gone by terrifically fast, and with the end of the year always comes renewals of permits and plates and tags and all kinds of different regulatory things that you've got to keep current. A lot of what you've got to renew, it depends on your operations, where you travel, what type of operation that you are. So I'm gonna highlight some of the what must be renewed basically by everyone, and then there's a number of items that you should double check, and that we here at Glostone find that is often missed and can create some havoc later on down the road when you go to renew something if it's not done. So we'll kind of cover those, and then just to kind of fill out the time, things to be aware of in 2019 from the IFTA IRP standpoint, and even a couple of things from the FMCSA standpoint. So that's kind of the agenda. So let's get right to it. And what must be renewed? And again, if you're an interstate carrier with vehicles that are over 26,000 pounds, you must renew IFTA unless you're buying individual trip permits for your fuel. You're required to have an IFTA account. That's the International Fuel Tax Agreement, and you renew that with your base state. So it expires December 31st. It must be renewed by January 1st. The cost, the fees that are associated with renewing your IFTA account varies greatly. There are some states where the cost is $0, and they will send you an IFTA sticker decal for free, up to a high of $280 here in Oregon. It's $280 for the first truck, and to get your IFTA license and your IFTA decal. What you'll need to carry in the truck is a copy of the IFTA license. The IFTA license is a company document. It's not a vehicle-specific document. It doesn't have the vehicle VIN number on it, license plate number on it. It is strictly a company document. So you will get one IFTA license, and if you have multiple trucks, you simply just make photocopies of that IFTA license and make sure it gets there's a copy in each truck, and obviously the decals on the side of the truck. So that's a must for anybody that is currently doing IFTA. IFTA is not required for trucks generally for trucks under 26,000 pounds or trucks that never leave the state and are intra-state. So this is interstate trucks. Your IFTA needs to be renewed. Another must is the Unified Carrier Registration. Unified Carrier Registration is a federal program that is basically just a fee generation where they collect fees to supplement safety programs. And it took the place of the single state registration. For those of you that go back several years, that used to be you have to pay a single state registration every year. They did away with that and came up with the UCR. And the UCR is what's changing. It's the trucks that must be registered through UCR are commercial motor vehicles that travel interstate. So commercial motor vehicle meaning 10,001 pounds and more that travel interstate in a commercial type of operation. So again, if you're intrastate, those trucks don't count towards UCR, but if they're interstate, they count. And basically, it's a fee per vehicle. And I'd love to tell you what the fees are, but the fees are they're being revised, and they're actually coming down. For the second year in a row, they've been coming down. UCR is mandated by law to only be able to collect a certain amount of money. They've been collecting over that amount of money. So as a result, they have to reduce the fees in order to stay under the cap that is mandated by law. So we're waiting for the FMCSA to post the new fees on the Federal Register in order to find out what they are, but I think they're typically in the $69, $68 range per truck, and those will be, typically we start renewing right now, but because the prices haven't been established, the whole thing is being delayed. So typically you would need to renew this by December 31st, but because of the price delay, they're probably going to give an extension. So we'll have some time probably in January to get that accomplished. But it's a must-have. There are a handful of states that offer a UCR payment portal through their state to be able to pay UCR. Most common state users have gone to a UCR system that was hosted by the state of Indiana, and you paid your UCR fees through that system. Since last year, UCR has built their own payment portal system. So they have a brand new payment portal system that you got to go to pay your UCRs. I've got it on the screen. It's www.ucr.gov, and you cannot start paying for 2019 yet. If you owe for 2018, you can go into that website and pay up for what you might have already owed for 2018 and didn't pay. But for 2019, they won't accept it yet. But that's where you will go to pay those fees once they open it up. So you'll have to stay tuned for when it is announced that that UCRs can be paid for. So again, the fees varies by the number of trucks that you need to report, and what to carry in the truck is absolutely nothing. You don't need to carry any kind of document. You're welcome to carry a receipt from the paid. They let you print off a receipt once you pay, but the UCR when you pay it is under your DOT number. Again, it's not truck specific. It just says that you have paid for your share of trucks under the system. It's not going to identify, and when you pay UCR, you're not identifying specific trucks. You're just saying, I've got 6 trucks or 1 truck or however many trucks, and then it's times the fee. So what an officer will do at roadside or at a weigh station, they will just simply pull up your US DOT number, and they can simply check to see if you paid UCR fees. All right, so that's those two. That's a must-do. The state tax account renewals, and again, these are only if you travel to these states, and they are the weight mileage tax accounts that must be renewed. So again, here in Oregon, and many of you on the phone are probably Oregon-based or at least travel Oregon miles, and by doing such, you have to have an Oregon tax account, and it is renewed every year. And to renew it, typically you can just go online to the Motor Carrier Transportation Division of ODOT and renew it online, or you can do it through the mail. The fees this year are $8.50 per truck. And the Oregon mile tax account is truck specific. So when you go to register, you're going to have to tell them VIN numbers and plates and all of that. And then what you will get once you pay $8.50 per, you will get a weight tax identifier piece of paper called a weight tax identifier that will be truck specific. And that piece of paper needs to go into each truck or the truck that it's assigned to, so that when in Oregon and fueling in Oregon, it will allow you to buy fuel without the state tax added to it, because you're going to be paying mileage tax instead of fuel tax. So the piece of paper that they give you is to allow you to buy fuel without the tax. Without that piece of paper, you go to fuel, they'll charge you tax at the pump, and you'll have to pay tax by the mile. So you don't want to be double taxed. So you need that tax identifier in each truck. So that's the Oregon account. New Mexico also needs to be renewed. So if you're traveling to New Mexico, again, you need to go and renew it. They have an online capability to be able to renew it. They used to offer or issue decals. They no longer do that, and nor do they issue a piece of paper. The fees have gone up this year to $10 per truck I think they were in the $8 range last year. I'm not sure, but I know they've gone up to 10, which is typically the opposite of what states are doing. I mean, Oregon, I know, is working on getting rid of its $8.50 fee. It won't happen for 2019, but for 2020, I think you'll see that going away. New Mexico went the other way and raised their fee. So what do you carry in the truck? Again, really nothing. It's going to be based on the truck license plate. You go into New Mexico, they're going to type in or scan your license plate, and it better be in their system. And if not, then there'll be a pretty steep ticket violation for not having a New Mexico weight tax distance account. And of course, once you have the account, that requires you to file tax returns. New Mexico, you file it quarterly, right along the same timelines as you do IFTA. With Oregon, most accounts are monthly that you have to file. Some accounts, if you've been at it a while in Oregon, they will allow you to pay quarterly as well. New Mexico is, if you travel there, is definitely something you need to address, and by December 31st. New this year, New York. If you travel to New York, you're going to need to renew. New York is very, well, I'll call it odd, in that it only renews every 3 years. Sometimes it renews 2 years if they feel like it. So they're they're not on a firm schedule. The last couple of times it's been every 3 years. So this is the third year. So if you travel to New York, you need to renew what they call their HUT permit, heavy use. I'm not sure what HUT stands for, but definitely renews this year. You have to renew it by going through the New York OSCR program, and it's a system within the New York state of New York that you have to enroll in, and then once you're enrolled, then you can use that system to renew your HUT permits. Again, it's very truck specific. You're going to have all your truck information, VIN numbers and such. The fees are $1.50 per truck, and for some reason, if you happen to operate fuel trailers, you're going to have to pay $1.50 for those as well. But any other trailers, you do not have to. It's just the truck. And what they will issue you to carry in the truck, there'll be a permit that you will be truck specific. You need to carry in your permit book in the truck, and they're going to issue you some decals to go on the side of the truck. I think this year the decals will be kind of a bright yellow, and New York is saying that you must do this by November 30th in order to get these decals in your permit by December 31st. And they do not issue any grace period. So, if you wait until December 15th, you will not have your HUT permits in time for January 1st. And if you're in New York at that time, you would be subject to a ticket. So anyway, if your operation takes you to New York, you need to pay attention to this one and get that taken care of. All right, so let's go to some things to double check and renew if needed. So the big thing in Oregon is truck registration and tags. If you're an Oregon carrier, your license plate, whether it's an apportioned license plate or if it's an intrastate commercial license plate, it expires December 31st. And but other states will have staggered registration, where if you signed up for your account in May, you probably have to renew it in April. So other states, your truck registrations happen at different times, but in Oregon, and I think there's a few other states that use December 31st as a single cutoff, and it makes it obviously very busy time for the Oregon DOT people. December 31st, having to renew everything. So there's again, commercial registration versus apportioned registration. Apportioned registration are for those trucks over 26,000 pounds that travel interstate. Commercial registration is basically where that vehicle never crosses the state line. It stays all inside the state. So if it's intrastate, you would get a commercial license plate. If it travels interstate, again over 26, you would get an apportioned plate. The records that you would need to submit to get your apportion plate are basically the miles that you traveled last year, and the year runs from July 1st, 2017 through June 30th, 2018, and you would need to report those miles by jurisdiction that you traveled. So, and how they would calculate your fees is really based on the percentage. So for example, if you traveled 25% of your miles during that reporting period in California, you would owe California 25% of whatever its fees are for whatever weight you run. If you run at 80,000 pounds, you would owe 25,000 or 25% of the fee for their 80,000 pound truck. And then the other percentages, so on and so forth, for each state. You would pay that fee to your base state, and you submit the forms to your base state. They do the calculations, they collect the money from you, but then they divvy it out to all the states that it goes to. So that's kind of how the apportioned plate thing works. The commercial plate, because it's all intra-state, all one state, you just pay your home state, your base state, whatever the registration fee is for the weight that you're registering at. So, and what you'll get in return are just your tags to put on the plates to show that you've got valid plates and tags for that year. And fees, it varies very, very widely. It just depends on where you travel and what are the rates in those states. Typically, you travel mostly the western states. Western states registration fees are generally the most expensive in the country. If you do a lot of traveling back east, some of those registration fees are cheaper. So the percentage that you travel in those states times a cheap rate kind of makes those fees a little cheaper. But it really depends on where you travel. What you'll get once you renew is obviously you get a cab card, and that is very truck specific, and you'll get the current year tags to put on the plates. So you need to make sure that the tags get on the plate, plus the cab card gets into the right truck. If you've got multiple trucks, and you need to make sure you get the right cab card into the right truck. There's probably maybe a few of you out there that might do hazmat. Hazmat permits, there's federal and state permits. Oregon does not have a permit. Washington does not have a permit, but other states like Colorado and California, they all have, or many of them have, state hazmat permits. And typically, these permits are staggered based on a year from when you purchase them. So they might not expire December 31st, and I guess the recommendation is if you are using these permits, you definitely don't want them to expire, and you should be looking at them to find out when the expiration is, so that you make sure that you get them renewed on time. Hazmat isn't anything to mess around with. They get very, very serious when it comes to hazmat type violations. The fees vary depending on the state that you travel to and what they ask for the particular permit. And obviously you would need to carry, they're truck specific, and you would need to carry a copy of that permit in the truck. All right, so what else is there? Typically, we find, with managing, our clients, is that oversized and overweight permits are often forgotten and are forgotten to be renewed. And oversized, overweight permits are issued by each state, and typically they renew on a staggered basis, basically a year from whenever you bought them. But many of them are expire December 31st, just because people are used to renewing them all at the same time. So if you're operating with oversized or overweight permits, again, it would be something to double check to make sure that you've got those covered and that they don't expire. We see violations every January where somebody, well, I forgot to renew my oversized overweight permit and I got a ticket because it was expired. So I know in Oregon they have a method where if you have a number of trucks and they each have an oversized overweight permit, you can consolidate them into one expiration date, so you don't have to remember to to renew them one at a time as they expire. You can put them all into one expiration bucket, and so you only have to remember once, but then all of them you can renew it at the same time. So just another reminder, your MCS 150 update, that is a requirement of the US DOT, and it's providing the DOT an update on the number of drivers, number of trucks that you operate. It's typically every 2 years, and when to do it is dictated, I think within your DOT number. I think there's, or DOT number, I think is depending on the digits and how the digits fall, is when you're supposed to update them. But how to check to see when your last MCS 150 update was done, you can go to the SAFER website, safer.org, I believe it is, and by plugging in your US DOT number, you can bring up all your stats, and it'll tell you when the last MCS 150 was done, and it needs to be within 2 years. Another common thing that we run into at renewal time is folks forget to renew their business name or business license within their base state. And typically when the DOT goes to renew your truck, they will check to make sure your business name and business license is up to date and accurate. And if it's not, everything stops until you go get that fixed. So before you get to the renewal process, it would be good to check your business name, business license, make sure it's up to date, that so that when you get to the counter or send in your renewals, that's not going to hold it up. And it's the same thing with the IRS heavy vehicle use tax. It's an IRS tax, but they leave it to the states and the commercial truck registration system to verify that the tax was paid. So they are going to, when you go to renew your trucks, they are going to ask for proof of payment of your heavy vehicle use tax. And if you don't have it, the process stops. And they'll make you go get a copy. If you haven't gotten a copy, you didn't file your heavy vehicle use tax. And again, these are for trucks that are 55,000 pounds and over. Then you're going to have to pay it, and probably a penalty, because the tax was due August 31st. A copy of the HUVIT will be asked for when you go to renew your truck. So make sure that those are up to snuff if you have trucks that qualify. Those of you that have an SCAC code, Standard Carrier Alpha code, typically those are needed to haul military loads. If you go up into Canada, some of the ports require this kind of code. So if you're in that type of operation, you probably have an SCAC code, and they need to be renewed. If you haul alcohol, a lot of states have alcohol permits that need to be renewed. And if you're traveling up into Canada, we need to make sure that any Canadian Authority permits have been renewed. So we run into those problems frequently at renewal time. So it's best to take a look now. If any of those apply, make sure that those are included with what you're looking at to get legal for 2019. So things to be aware of, and I guess first one, for your sanity, timing is everything. My example of all the license plates in Oregon expire December 31st. As you can imagine, it puts a heavy workload on the Oregon registration unit. Obviously, IFTA expires too, so their IFTA department is going crazy with trying to process all of that. I know at the ports of entry in Oregon, the last week of December, the lines go out the door, and you're waiting and waiting and waiting. If you're on the phone, you're waiting and waiting and waiting. Timing is everything. If you can get it done even 2 weeks early, 3 weeks early, you'll save yourself a lot of time and a lot of grief, especially if you have questions. So often there's a question, well, isn't there a grace period in order to renew? And the simple answer is nope, there is not. There are things such as IFTA, for example, will allow you to March 1st to put your decal on your truck. And the reason they do that is because typically December and January and February are very cold months, especially if you're up in Wisconsin or places like that, and stickers don't tend to stick when it's below zero. So they offer a grace period to put the sticker on the side of the truck. There is not a grace period to pay the fee. The fee is supposed to be paid by December 31st, but they will allow you a grace period in order to get the decal on the truck. I know there are carriers that won't renew their plates and tags if they expire, say, December 31st. Well, I'm going to take a vacation in January and I'll renew it in February. Well, if you don't renew timely, they will basically cancel out your account, and then you're going to have to reopen it. So they don't allow you to do that. And if they reestablish your account in February, they're going to make you pay for January anyway. So you need to, and these are apportioned type fees. Commercial fees are a bit different intrastate. The other thing to be aware of is, and we see this every year, is the spam in phone calls and emails. And most common is UCR. You'll get this email saying, "We're from the DOT. You didn't sign up for UCR. You're subject to violation. You better pay now, or else you're subject to being thrown in jail or something." And these spam are very, very common, and typically they will file your UCR for you, but it's probably at triple the price. So be aware. These spammers find easy prey within the trucking world, and I can tell you that the IRS and the DOTs do not spam you with that kind of content. So just be aware that that's out there and it's happening, and don't get fooled by it, because it'll just end up costing you money. So some things to be aware of with the IFTA program and the IR programs itself. And this is mostly just FYI, so that you can kind of see where things are going with IFTA and IRP and your registrations and decals. The regulators of IFTA and IRP, they're going through a data standardization project, and meaning that every state collects all of this data, but there's been no way for all the states to tie into this data, so that if you got stopped, if you're an Oregon-based carrier and you got stopped roadside in Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania wouldn't necessarily have all the data that it should to be able to see if you're properly registered with IFTA or IRP, because all of the data is back in Oregon. But they are working quickly on data standardization, where it ties all of this in together. So they are going to be able to look anywhere and see your data, and that's a big effort between IFTA and IRP, and even the feds and the DOT federally, is to data standardization, so that all of this new technology can kind of talk to each other. Something new for 2019 within IFTA and IRP is that both plans have made it mandatory that jurisdictions accept an electronic copy of the credential, meaning if you have a PDF on your phone or your tablet of your IFTA license or of your cab card, that will be acceptable at roadside instead of having to carry a piece of paper. So that's new as of January 1st, 2019. Prior to this time, the language says that it must be paper, but they changed the language to say that electronic cab cards, electronic IFTA licenses are acceptable. And I would just have a heavy caution. I just returned from a conference from IFTA IRP, and included law enforcement. Law enforcement folks are a little concerned about this, because they don't want to be fumbling around with phones and tablets and trying to see these credentials. So I would, until all of these, sheriffs and local police and troopers get up to speed with this electronic credentials, I would carry paper. If you wanted to carry electronic, that's great. Maybe use it as your first line of to show an officer that you've got the right credentials, and then back it up by paper, just in case you get somebody that doesn't really know what the rules are on the enforcement side. So, and this electronic credentials is or at least a copy of it, is step one in kind of an evolution of where IFTA and IRP are headed. Step two, which is still probably 2 years away, maybe 3 years away, is electronic verification of credential. EVOC is what they're calling the acronym, electronic verification of credential. And this goes beyond having an electronic copy. Where this goes, and it goes towards that data standardization that I mentioned, where this goes is where they can stop you at roadside and pull up immediately all of your information and know whether you're good or not. Because as we all know, a piece of paper, we could have a cab card that as an owner-operator, maybe I was leased on to a company and I had a cab card under that company, and now I'm not with that company anymore, but I still have my cab card, or I still have my IFTA license from that company, and it might not be any good anymore, but I still have that piece of paper. So the electronic verification would eliminate the ability to do that, because it would be up to the date as of that day of what is valid and what is not. So that's what the law enforcement community is going for, and again, it requires all of this data standardization to do it. But they're working on it. They're working hard on it. But it's such a huge project. It's still going to be a year or two before they get there. So, step one is to get enforcement used to looking at electronic credentials. Step two is to get to this automatic or verification type of process, and then finally step three. And if you were keep track of what's happening within the inspections FMCSA world, you will know that last year the CVSA, Commercial Vehicle Safety Alliance, adopted a Class 8 inspection. So I'm sure most of you know, like a Class 1 inspection, a Class 2, because it happens to your trucks all the time, but they just implemented approved a Class 8 inspection. They haven't put it into play yet, but it is coming. And it's coming with technology. And what a Class 8 inspection is simply a truck driving by a virtual scale, and it is scanned, and all of this data comes up automatically. And again, this is probably a little farther down the stream, but once that happens, states don't have to build weigh stations. They can just set up these inspection can't even be portable type of scanning systems, and they can have an officer just up on the overpass, and if you fail the scan, they're chasing you down. So that's where it's headed. We're still a few years away from that, but technology is moving enforcement along quite rapidly. Another area of concern that's being talked about a lot in the IFTA and IRP community is, and it kind of goes along with the ELDs that were mandated by the federal side, the FMCSA. A lot of electronic records from the ELDs are being used for IFTA and used for IRP, and then the auditors are looking at these records and are finding that the data is not sufficient for an audit, and and basically these audits are not going well at all, and carriers are thinking they've got all this great records and GPS stuff, but it doesn't meet the requirements of IFTA and IRP, and as a result, some very heavy fines are coming down the pipe. So if you're using ELD data for IFTA and IRP, there are some very serious things that you should be, internal controls that you should be looking at and making sure that you've got going to make sure the data you're getting is looked at, it's kept up to speed, it's any gaps are tracked down, that you've got all the trucks reported and not reporting the trucks that shouldn't be reported. There's a lot that goes into it, and the auditors are telling us it's not going very well to this point. So I would caution you with that. And I think my last slide is what to be aware of on the FMCSA side. And in 2019, they have announced that they're going to bring out, re-emerge their new and improved CSA program. FMCSA has never really hit a deadline yet that I can remember. So it's still iffy if it'll happen in 2019. But from what little information is out there, this new model that Congress mandated that they come up with is going to go away from them trying to predict a crash, more towards trying to determine what your safety culture is. And it's still going to be based on violations, but new algorithms and new statistical modeling and such is all going to go into it. But it's coming in they say 2019. We'll see, but you should be looking for that. ELDs full implementation is coming in 2019, meaning if you haven't converted to an ELD, you're still using the older models, the AOBRDs, those go away. And there's actually some positives that have come out of ELDs. I know there's two sides. There's people that really wanted the ELD implementation, and there's a group, another side that hated ELD. The positives that we have seen, is that once a driver gets through the steep learning curve, it is a steep learning curve, that they generally like it. It is less paperwork, that they have to spend doing. What came out of it as well is because these ELDs are very, very precise and measures things up to the second versus 15-minute increments like the paper models, the old paper logs do. That the FMCSA found that they needed to give new guidance on personal conveyance. And the personal conveyance guidance has given some flexibility. And if you haven't looked at what the new personal conveyance rules and regulations allow, I would suggest that you take a look at it. I think we did a webinar on that last month, if I recall. And I think we probably have a recording of that if you want to just listen to see what the new guidance is. So that was a good thing. And another good thing is they are actually finally looking at changing hours of service, giving it more flexibility. Just because these ELDs are so inflexible that it really kind of pointed to the need for more flexibility. And before, all of that inflexibility was hidden within, the creative writing of paper logs. And because they couldn't do that anymore, lots of pushback from industry. And so now they've just finished holding their listening sessions, and they've got some changes in mind to help loosen up or give more flexibility to these hours of service changes without sacrificing safety. And let's see, a couple more things. This one I learned, last week with the law enforcement folks. They were, they tend to be on the side of ELDs that don't like it because they have to know 350 different units because there's 350 different ELD vendors out there, and it's just impossible for them to know how these devices work. And they really have to depend on the driver to know their device, to show them around how to get to where they know what they need out of the device. The officers do, but they need the driver to be able to drive it and get it to where they can get this information. When the driver cannot do it, it leads to a pretty lengthy stop, and they've got to fumble through it and really take a lot more time than what it should and what they want to spend, but that's what, if the driver knows their device and can get to where they need to go within the device, then it goes pretty smooth. And but it's still an evolution. It's what we're doing today with ELDs is going to change over the next couple of years as we take a look at the requirements and what the inflexibilities are and things like that. But teaching your drivers how to use their device is really critical at roadside, and it would make the stops go much, much easier if they do. And the other things we learned, I learned, is that carriers, because of ELD, are becoming much more picky who they haul for. There's more loads than there are trucks available to haul them, so the carriers can be more choosy, and the shippers and receivers who tend to treat the carriers with a lot of disrespect, with taking their time in loading or unloading, not making facilities available and that kind of thing, are having to rethink that, because they need to attract carriers, because they need that stuff shipped or they need it received. So we're actually seeing and hearing from carriers who are able to negotiate higher prices and detention time, and shippers and receivers are actually, some of the larger ones are building driver lounges and starting to finally cater to the professional driver. So I think those are good things that have come out of the ELD situation, and something that hopefully we can agree that those are good things. The other thing that is fairly new, the FMCSA has a web page or website dedicated to ELDs, and they have added on that website the ability to upload your ELD logs, and you as the carrier can view the output of that ELD and see what the officer sees. So I've just learned of this. I haven't had a chance to try it yet and see what it looks like, but we certainly intend to do it. But it's off of the FMCSA website, based specifically for the ELDs, and again, a new feature that you can actually take your ELD files and your output files and run it through it, and you'll be able to see exactly what the officer sees. So if you ever wanted to do that and see what that does, that's definitely available to you now. All right, that's the presentation. Luke, I'm not sure if there's been any questions, or if there's links to websites or additional information that you would like to have on any of this stuff. Just contact us, and we'll be happy to tell you what we know or research it for you.
Yes, and thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Dave. That's a lot of great information there. If you have any questions, this is the time to write them, type them in our chat box here. There's no questions as of right now, so I'm going to give you guys about a minute or two to see if you have any questions. I know Dave did scare you about, Class 8 inspections and things like that coming down the road, so you can always use a company like Glostone to help with the management of your files. We at Glostone do it all. So, but more specifically, I don't know how this is coming on your screen, but this is our website. It talks about all of our asset management, licensing, permits. We can help you with that whole process, no matter how small or large your fleet is. Dave mentioned past webinars. There's a couple ways you can go to our Glostone website. Actually, I'll go back real quick, and under driver development, there's the monthly webinars. You can click in there. There's a link to every webinar we've done since 2017. You can also check out our YouTube channel. You can see all these different playlists here. Our webinar series, there's 20 plus webinars on there. You can see the past one that Dave was talking about with personal conveyance and much more. We have a short video series, what's a PSP report, and a lot of fun, hot topics that we like to cover that we'll be continually updating throughout the year as well, and much more. You can see our 2016, 2017, and 2018 conference information, presentations in past conferences, and stay tuned for 2019. Again, January, this is our last webinar for the year. Coming up is our January conference for 2019, January 25th. We'll have more information. We're going to invite everybody to it in mid-November when we we launch that, and there'll be a website for you to register each person that you want to attend, whether you attend in person in Portland, Oregon, or if you want to just watch the live stream or receive the recordings of all those presentations. We have all of that available for you for that conference. Thank you, everybody. That wraps up our 2018 webinar series. Again, stay tuned for 2019 conference and our 2019 webinar series as well. Feel free to give us, if you have any questions or comments until then, you can give us a call. Our contact information is right here, and you will receive the information and slides tomorrow. Have a great rest of your year.